The bruise on Dorothy Williams's wrist had faded to yellow, but the pain in her heart remained fresh. She sat in the Family Feud waiting area, pulling her cardigan sleeves down to cover the marks, a habit she developed over the past 2 years. At 71, she had learned to hide evidence of the unthinkable truth that her own son had become her worst enemy. "Grandma, you sure you want to do this?" her granddaughter Lisa whispered beside her. Dorothy nodded, though her hands shook slightly as she thought about the empty bank account, the forged signatures, the promises that had turned into threats. This was supposed to be healing, a chance to reclaim some joy after losing everything to the person she'd trusted most. The Williams family from Detroit had been selected after Lisa submitted their application during one of Dorothy's darkest periods. It was her attempt to get her grandmother away from the toxic situation, to remind her that not all family members were predators. The prize money could help Dorothy rebuild, but mostly Lisa wanted to see her grandmother's spirit return. Steve Harvey's voice filled the studio as the cameras prepared to roll. The energy was infectious and celebratory, designed to make families feel blessed and united. But Dorothy carried the weight of knowing that family could be the source of your greatest betrayal, that blood ties could become chains of abuse. She wore a long-sleeved purple blouse, despite the warm studio lights. Every piece of clothing now served the dual purpose of covering bruises and maintaining dignity. Her independence had been stolen along with her savings, but she refused to let her appearance reflect her brokenness. The game began with its usual excitement. The Williams family faced the Johnson family from Texas in what should have been a joyful competition. Steve worked his magic, drawing laughs and creating those moments of connection that made the show special. Dorothy stood at the end of her family's podium. She tried to participate when the cameras focused on her, but every question about family felt like salt in an open wound. How could she celebrate family when her own had destroyed her? "Survey says," Steve announced as the first round progressed. The Williams family was doing well, their answers lighting up the board with encouraging frequency. Lisa kept glancing at her grandmother, hoping to see some spark of the woman she'd been before her son's betrayal. The studio lights were bright and warm. For most contestants, they represented hope and possibility. For Dorothy, they felt exposing, as if everyone could see the shame she carried for trusting the wrong person with everything she'd worked for. During a commercial break, Steve worked the audience as he always did. His natural charisma filled the studio, making strangers feel like family. He noticed Dorothy immediately, standing quietly, while sadness flickered across her weathered face. There was something in her posture that caught his attention. The way she held herself carefully, like someone who had learned to expect harm from unexpected places. Steve had learned to read people over decades of television, and Dorothy was carrying pain that ran deeper than disappointment. "You doing all right over there?" Steve asked during the break, walking toward the Williams family podium. Dorothy managed a weak smile that carried more hurt than happiness. "Just grateful to be here," she replied softly, unconsciously rubbing her wrist. Lisa stepped closer to her grandmother protectively. "She's been through a lot recently," she said, her voice carrying the anger of someone who had watched innocence be exploited. "Some people aren't who you think they are." The cameras came back on. Steve returned to his position, but his eyes kept drifting to Dorothy throughout the next round. Her family was winning, but she seemed disconnected from their success, present but haunted by experiences that had shattered her faith in humanity. The fast money round arrived. Lisa went first and scored 156 points. The family needed only 44 more points to win the $20,000, money that could help Dorothy rebuild what had been stolen from her. Dorothy stepped up to the podium. Her family cheered behind her, but she barely heard them through the fog of betrayal that had become her constant companion. The bright lights felt overwhelming, the studio audience vast, the pressure mounting in ways that had nothing to do with any game. "All right, Dorothy," Steve said, his voice carrying extra gentleness that somehow reached through her defenses. "You need 44 points to win for your family. You ready?" Dorothy nodded, though her hands trembled as she gripped the podium. remembering other hands that had taken everything from her. The questions began with careful pacing. Name something people trust others with. Money, Dorothy answered automatically, though the word tasted bitter in her mouth. Trust had become a dangerous luxury she could no longer afford. Good answer. Name something that should stay in the family. Love. Name something people save for their children. Inheritance. Each answer came from a place of deep irony, from someone who had learned that family could be the cruelest betrayer, that love could be weaponized, that saving for children could mean giving them the tools to destroy you. Name something that gets broken easily. Dorothy hesitated, thinking of all the ways her son had shattered her world. Trust, she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Final question, Dorothy. Who betrayed you? The question hit her like a physical blow. Dorothy's face went completely white as she stared at Steve. The carefully maintained composure she'd built over 2 years of hiding abuse began cracking under the pressure of acknowledging the unthinkable truth. The studio waited. Her family waited. But Dorothy couldn't speak because the question had reached into the deepest part of her shame and made it public. How do you admit that your own child became your predator? Dorothy started, then stopped. Her breathing became shallow as 2 years of accumulated trauma began rising in her chest. The bright lights suddenly felt like interrogation lamps, the audience like a jury waiting to judge her failure as a mother. My own son, she whispered, so quietly the microphones barely picked it up, but the cameras caught everything. The way her face crumpled, the tears that started flowing, the way she seemed to shrink into herself with shame. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of episodes. He'd seen contestants struggle with difficult questions, seen them get emotional, seen them freeze under pressure. But this was different. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. He set down his cards and walked toward Dorothy. Not the measured walk of a television host, maintaining show pace, but the immediate response of a human being, recognizing someone in profound pain. The studio fell silent as all protocols were abandoned. Dorothy, Steve said softly, reaching the podium. What happened? Can you tell me? Behind the scenes, Dorothy made a decision that would change everything. She looked up at Steve, tears streaming down her face, and let 2 years of hidden abuse pour out. My son Michael started asking for money 2 years ago, she said, her voice breaking. Small amounts at first. He said he was having trouble with bills, needed help getting back on his feet. The words came out haltingly, as if speaking them made the betrayal more real. The confession echoed across the studio like a shockwave. Audience members shifted uncomfortably, many dealing with family financial requests themselves. Camera operators continued filming, knowing they were witnessing something far beyond entertainment. Then he asked me to co-sign loans, Dorothy continued, her voice growing stronger through the tears. To put my house up as collateral. He said he was starting a business that he'd pay me back with interest. The studio was completely silent. Steve Harvey, who had built a career on quick responses and perfect timing, found himself in territory no game show had ever prepared him for. This wasn't television anymore. This was elder abuse made visible. Dorothy, Steve said, his voice stripped of all performance. Did he pay you back? The question was gentle, though he could already see the answer in her eyes. He took everything, Dorothy whispered. My retirement savings, my house, even my late husband's life insurance money. When I asked for it back, he got angry. He said I was being selfish, that family should help family. Lisa was crying now, standing at the family podium watching her grandmother finally speak the words she'd been too ashamed to say. She had tried to warn Dorothy, but love had made her grandmother blind to her son's manipulation. Steve looked at Lisa, then back at Dorothy. In that moment, he understood something profound about the difference between family obligation and family exploitation. And when you had nothing left, he asked gently. He got violent, Dorothy replied, unconsciously rubbing her wrist. He said it was my fault for not having more money, that I was useless, a burden, that maybe I didn't deserve to live in my own house anymore. The pain in her voice was devastating to hear. "He pushed me down the stairs last month," she continued, her voice barely audible. "Told me it was an accident, but I saw his face when I fell. He wasn't sorry. He was angry that I hadn't gotten hurt worse." Steve Harvey had made people laugh for decades. But in this moment, he learned something about the difference between entertaining people and witnessing evil wearing the mask of family love. He did something unprecedented in television history. He walked around the podium and pulled Dorothy into his arms. Not a quick, camera-friendly embrace, but the kind of hug that says you are not alone, you are not to blame. The kind that transfers strength from one human being to another. "Dorothy," he said, still holding her, "I want you to listen to me very carefully." He pulled back to look at her directly. "You did nothing wrong. You are not stupid. You are not a burden. You are a mother who loved her son, and he took advantage of that love." The audience began to respond. Not with applause, but with sounds of recognition, of shared outrage at the abuse of trust. People were crying openly, touched by the raw honesty of someone speaking about betrayal by the person who should protect them most. "You see," Steve continued, "some people think that because Michael is your son, you should have seen this coming. But predators don't target strangers, they target the people who love them most, who trust them completely." But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, Dorothy just showed us something important about elder abuse. About how family members can become the worst kind of criminals because they use love as a weapon." His voice carried across the studio with absolute conviction. "She's been carrying this shame, thinking that admitting her son is abusing her somehow makes her a failure as a mother. But the only failure here is Michael's failure to be human." The audience erupted. Not in the programmed applause of a television taping, but in genuine recognition of courage they had just witnessed. This was survival and betrayal, and the courage to finally speak truth to power. "Dorothy," Steve continued, turning back to her, "Michael didn't just steal your money, he stole your faith in family, your sense of safety, your belief that love is real. But I want you to know something. His betrayal doesn't define love. Lisa's loyalty does. The way Lisa brought you here, the way she's standing up for you, the way she's trying to help you rebuild. That's what family really looks like. Not the person who takes advantage of your love, but the person who protects it." Dorothy was sobbing now, but the tears felt different. They weren't just tears of shame anymore. They were tears of recognition, of finally understanding that she was a victim, not a volunteer in her own destruction. "But how do I trust anyone again?" Dorothy whispered. "How do I know who's safe? Michael was my baby. I raised him, loved him, gave him everything. If he could do this to me, how do I trust my own judgment?" The fear in her voice was heartbreaking. "Dorothy," Steve replied firmly, "you don't stop trusting everyone because one person betrayed you. You learn to trust wisely. You learn to see the difference between people who want to help you and people who want to help themselves to you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Without explanation, he dialed a number while the cameras continued rolling. The conversation was brief, conducted in whispers that only Dorothy could hear. When he finished, he looked back at her with something approaching justice. "Dorothy, I just spoke to some friends of mine, people who work with elder abuse cases. We're going to make sure you get legal help to go after Michael for what he stole." The Johnson family, who had been watching this unfold from their podium, abandoned their competitive position entirely. They walked across the stage and surrounded Dorothy, their opponents becoming her protection in a matter of minutes. "You know what?" Steve announced to the studio. "Both families win today. Because today we learned something more valuable than any prize money could teach us." He looked directly into the main camera. "We learned that elder abuse is real. That it usually comes from family members. That loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. That speaking up about abuse takes more courage than staying silent." The audience rose to their feet, not in the programmed applause of a television taping, but in genuine recognition of bravery they had just witnessed. Dorothy stood surrounded by strangers who had become family, held up by love that didn't require exploitation. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. Steve removed his suit jacket, the one he wore for every taping, and gently placed it around Dorothy's shoulders. "This jacket has been with me through every show," he said. "It's seen families celebrate and struggle, love and betray. But today, it's going to wrap around someone who reminded us that real family protects each other, not preys on each other." The jacket was warm and substantial, making Dorothy feel protected in a way she hadn't experienced since before Michael's betrayal. It felt like being claimed by people who wanted nothing from her except her well-being. As the cameras stopped rolling and the audience began to file out, something unprecedented happened. People didn't leave immediately. They approached Dorothy one by one, sharing their own stories of family betrayal, of financial abuse, of learning to rebuild trust. A woman whose brother had stolen her inheritance, a man whose daughter had emptied his accounts, an elderly couple who had lost their home to a grandson's schemes. Each person who spoke to Dorothy added another thread to a tapestry of survival she hadn't known existed. Steve stayed with her through it all. This wasn't publicity or show business. This was community forming around shared understanding of what it means to be betrayed by the people who should love you most. The episode aired 8 months later, exactly as it had been filmed. No editing to soften Dorothy's pain, no removing of the hard truths she had spoken. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Elder abuse hotlines reported increased calls. Legal aid organizations saw a surge in requests for help with financial exploitation cases. But most importantly, families began having honest conversations about boundaries, manipulation, and what constitutes real love. Dorothy pressed charges against Michael with the legal help Steve had arranged. The case went to court, and while she couldn't recover all her money, seeing him held accountable helped heal something in her that money couldn't fix. The business card Steve had given her led to resources that transformed her situation. Housing assistance that helped her find a safe place to live. Support groups where she met other elder abuse survivors who understood her shame and helped her overcome it. Steve's jacket became a symbol Dorothy shared with other abuse survivors in her support group. She wore it to her first court appearance, a reminder that she had an army of people who believed her story and supported her fight for justice. 2 years later, Dorothy had an answer to Steve's question. Michael had betrayed her, but that betrayal had led her to discover what real family looked like. People who protected instead of preyed, who gave instead of took, who built up instead of tore down. She learned that being a good mother didn't mean accepting abuse from your children. That love without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. That family members who use your love against you aren't family. They're predators wearing familiar faces. Today, Dorothy works with Elder Protection Services, helping other seniors recognize the signs of financial abuse. She tells them about the day she learned that speaking the truth about family betrayal was the first step toward freedom. Harvey still keeps a photo from that day in his dressing room. Not a professional shot, but a candid moment of Dorothy surrounded by strangers who had become family. It reminds him that sometimes the most important television happens when people find the courage to name their abusers. The studio audience from that day formed an informal support network for elder abuse survivors that continues to this day. They check on each other during difficult times, offer assistance during legal proceedings, and prove that witnessing someone's truth creates lasting responsibility for their protection. Dorothy's story proves that elder abuse is not a family matter, it's a crime. That loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. That the most dangerous predators are often the ones who share your DNA and know exactly how to manipulate your love. Because Dorothy Williams wasn't just an elderly woman who trusted the wrong person. She was a mother whose love was weaponized against her, a survivor who found her voice, a reminder that family should be a source of protection, not predation. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that the person who hurt you most was the person you loved most. Because only in that admission can healing begin, justice be sought, and real family be distinguished from the wolves in familiar clothing?